I'm not sure about you, but I've personally been a bit burnt out on Battlefield recently, mostly because of how terrible the netcode continues to be and how shallow and random parts of the gunplay have felt. So this week's update has me actually looking forward to the changes coming, not because I think it magically fixes everything and not because I'm ready to give the developers massive amount of credit for it. To me, this feels more like a correcting of a launch level problem than something deserving of major praise, but the direction here of the update mostly is what I think the game needed from the start. So today, I want to quickly run through the main changes, talk about how I think this will impact Battlefield 6, what it can mean for the game moving forward, and my overall takeaway. Again, I'm not going to go through every single change here, but if you already know the changes, feel free to skip ahead to the next section. They'll be making some netcode improvements, but again, the main direction here I think is pretty clear. They're focusing on recoil and making it more predictable. They talked about how some weapons had too much variation in recoil direction and intensity, which made them harder to actually learn and master, if possible at all. So the goal now seems to be making weapons feel more consistent without removing the recoil entirely. Bullet deviation or weapon bloom is also being adjusted, so mostly after the first shot here, so full auto spraying should be less effective at longer ranges, but this should allow for burst and tap firing to matter a bit more. Muzzle velocities are also being adjusted for most weapons, especially SMGs, with bullet drag also being increased at longer ranges, so range, leading targets, weapon knowledge should matter a lot more than they do now. Limb multipliers are also being added with this update, which means that limb and lower torso shots will have reduced damage across all weapon classes, which means that headshots will be more important and more rewarding. And then for the sniper rifles, sweet spot ranges are being narrowed because they were too generous and overlapped too much between rifles. So the simple version of this is that Battlefield 6 is moving towards more predictable recoil, more meaningful shot placement, more range discipline, and overall more weapon knowledge. Obviously, I think the biggest impact here is going to be the gunplay, and it should become more learnable and more precision based, which matters because there's a difference between depth and randomness. Ultimately, right now, what we have is random recoil, which is a problem because recoil is something the player should be able to learn and control. If a weapon kicks in a consistent way, even if it's difficult, the player can learn that pattern. We can build muscle memory, we can improve the control, and we can create mastery as a result. But if the recoil has too much random variation in direction or intensity, then the thing that we are trying to master keeps changing on the fly. At that point, the weapon is not just difficult, it's inconsistent and maybe even impossible to truly master. And the thing to remember here is that inconsistency is not the same thing as skill. This is why I'm glad they're making these changes. Recoil should be a little more predictable. Weapons should still have recoil, yes, but they should require control, and that recoil needs to be readable and learnable to some extent. When it comes to the dispersion or weapon bloom, I think this is a little different. I've seen a few people comment about this on other people's videos and being worried about the inconsistencies from the weapon bloom itself. Dispersion here does create inconsistencies because your bullets are no longer going exactly where the center of your reticle is, but that kind of inconsistency can still be mastered if the system is readable and the player has ways to control it. Ultimately, this can be learned and mastered through learning when to do long bursts, when to do tap fire instead, when to go full auto. This allows you to know what ranges are safe to spray and which ranges require more discipline. So even if the dispersion has randomness to it, the player can still master the conditions around that randomness, creating consistency and ultimate mastery, because with something like random recoil variation, this changes the physical behavior that we're trying to control, and ultimately it's not something that can truly be mastered, while dispersion changes the accuracy limits of the weapon, which is something that we can learn the limits of and adjust around those, ultimately allowing for mastery. And this is why I think overall the update could be really good for Battlefield 6. The game should be building a skill gap through aim, recoil control, positioning, target selection, range knowledge, and decision making, but not through random mechanics that make weapons harder to read without making them more rewarding to master. So to me, this update looks like a total shift towards gunplay that rewards precision, weapon knowledge, and better decision making. Lower limb damage means sloppy shots are less rewarding, higher headshot value means clean aim matters more, lower velocity and more drag means range matters more, and more predictable recoil means weapons can actually be learned and mastered. This is something I've been advocating for on this channel, and I think this is what matters the most here for Battlefield 6 moving forward. If this is the design direction, then weapons should start feeling more distinct, ranges should matter more, and better players should have more ways to separate themselves through aim, control, positioning, and weapon knowledge. But this also allows for players who may not be top of the leaderboard to have room for improvement, to learn, and do better. For sniping specifically, I think the sweet spot changes fit into that same direction. Sweet spot ranges are being narrowed, which means one shot to the body windows are going to be smaller, and the rifle should have less overlap. What I think is this probably is going to be a good short-term change, but if sweet spots are going to exist, they should at least require some real range knowledge and positioning, and I'm not sure if that can truly be balanced. But what I'm hoping here, and what I think, is that this will be the first step towards sweet spots eventually being removed entirely. The reason for my thinking on this is that the whole update seems to be moving away from shallow forgiveness and towards more deliberate weapon use, and in that kind of sandbox here, sweet spots start to feel more out of place because they're still body shot one-shots. So requiring more consistency and skill from other weapons and not from the recon class and sniper rifles in particular wouldn't make sense here. So long term, I think sniper rifle identity would be better built around muzzle velocity, drag, ADS speed, magazine size, reload speed, that sort of thing, because that would allow for the rifles to feel different without relying so much on sweet spot mechanics. So overall, I think this update is a good sign for the direction of Battlefield 6, but I'm still cautious about it. I see this as more like correcting a launch level problem than something deserving of major praise, because this is closer to how the game should have played from the start. Weapons should have been more learnable, precision should have mattered more, randomness should not have been used as a substitute for depth, and with the netcode still being this bad, the gunplay itself should not have added even more inconsistency to the problem. But until we get access to the update, we don't know how good these changes will feel in practice. We also don't know if parts of this are going to be half measures, similar to other areas of the game that I've covered in prior videos. So for now, I think this is encouraging, but I'm not going to overpraise it here either. This is the direction Battlefield 6 should have been moving in from day one. Now the question is whether this is the start of better gunplay foundation or just another patch that sounds better on paper than it feels in-game. But what do you think? Do you feel like the direction that they're shifting towards is better for Battlefield 6 as a whole, or do you feel like this is going the entirely wrong way? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. I'll catch you on the next one. RAMTEID out.